This channel is geared towards character change. Why is that? And why is that important? Well, some people are raised in amazing homes and they are helped, they are loved, they are validated, and they are raised as a complete person, as in mind, body, and spirit. And the parents love them and care for them and prepare them for the world in a very nurturing, loving manner. Well, the truth is, in our society, not everybody gets to be raised properly. It just doesn't work that way. We have a huge amount of broken generations going back years. And then you have these broken people raising people and they're breaking them. Like from the get-go, they got little kids and they don't know any better just out of ignorance. They just ruin them and break them. Well, some people are just evil actually and they do it on purpose. And some people don't know because they're absolutely ignorant to love and kindness and validation and knowing that how I'm raising this child now is input and programming in their brain on the cycles that will be repeating in their life and how they respond to life events. Now, breaking that down a little bit, let's take for instance, as a toddler, I had a family member that SA'd me. And this left me fractured and broken from a very early age. Now, those people were extremely ignorant because I needed loving parents. But when I would present in broken manner because I had such abuse done to me, they would abuse me further by spanking me because they didn't like how my emotions were presenting. And so they used pain to put this child back in the way they want this child to be. But the thing is, I am not alone. There are tens of thousands of other adults that are now adults that lived through the same type of parenting, which was atrocious, honestly. But that continues because once a person presents as a victim when they've been victimized, predators can smell that out because in our society, some of the weakest predators and most pathetic people are the ones that prey on children, and they know exactly which children to look for that the parents aren't watching and don't care about. So they slide right in and they take advantage. But as the child grows up and grows up, they have all this scarring in their brain and they are just broken, and they go and find these coping mechanisms that make them feel better because they were never raised properly. And this continues into adult life when situations arise that are difficult, that are really hard, or they take another blow in life. They respond in panic and chaos because that's what they were taught. And then when other people see this person in panic and chaos, they treat them poorly usually. And they're like, oh, just get over it. How come you can't handle this? How come you can't deal with this? Well, the sad reality, it becomes the adult's responsibility to reprogram their brain and how they respond to adversity that is presented in life. This has to be free of the victim mentality, of everybody's out to get me, poor me, blah, 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 blah. When, yes, it may be the case that there are family members that actively hate their child. Yes. It may be the case that there are people that are specifically looking for somebody that doesn't really know how to navigate the world in a safe manner, and they will latch onto them and prey on the weak. Yes, that is reality. But it eventually becomes our fault when we keep allowing ourselves to step into those situations without being wise. It's our fault when we respond as a victim, and it's our fault when we just freak out and just collapse or go back to these coping mechanisms that are unhealthy. And for me, when I was younger, after I think my second tour, I really leaned in heavy into drinking and pills whenever I could. It wasn't a lot of pills. It was just whoever had some pain pills, I would bum them, and then I would take them. It's not funny, but that's what I really leaned into because I felt really good, and I didn't have all these problems that had been plaguing me my entire life. It was my escape. It was an extremely unhealthy coping mechanism, and I did not even know it was a coping mechanism. Now let's fast forward another decade. Things still happen in our lives which are just traumatic and they suck. Because let's look at it. We live in a severely broken society. Like, the family is attacked hardcore. Strong men are attacked tremendously. And the family unit is broken. But when you take a generation that has been raised by abusive parents, and that's not saying they are all abusive, but there's a massive amount of people that I have met and talked to personally that were abused as children. And now they're adults and the parents lie about it, they act like it never happened, and they act like, oh, you're just a victim. Well, first off, the parents are pathetic and weak because they won't fess up and be like, I was terrible and I apologize, please forgive me. But now as adults in this broken society, and after a road that we've traveled that has been rocky and incredibly rough, we have to decide, are we going to change the next generation, or are we going to be victims and lean into these unhealthy coping mechanisms? Just trying to blame anybody, lashing out, and say drinking or hard drugs or pills or overeating or self-indulgence or just totally shutting off from the world. And sometimes shutting off from the world is good, but those other coping mechanisms are just a few of the many that we use to escape reality and feel good. You know what? I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense to want to escape a terrible reality. What I am saying is that we must transform ourselves into an incredibly resilient version that is no longer affected and no longer cares about the ones who have hurt us, but we choose to leave them behind and no longer address them and move into a future where we are healed and that we are pursuing applying all of these healthy ways of living that we've learned. And this is where character change plays a huge role in our future. Our future could be bright and glorious. Our future could be mundane, or our future could be horrible, terrible existence. Let's take the horrible, terrible existence from a lifetime of trauma. Well, we're here in the horrible, terrible future existence. Every time something bad happens, we try to call our parents. Well, what are we going to get from them? They're just going to treat us like crap because it'll validate them in how they view us. It'll put us back in the box of the way they want us viewed, because then they will get to go gossip to other people and talk about, oh, they just can't get their act together. Oh, they just won't do well, when they won't take responsibility for how they treated us. But then we fall deeper into the victim mentality, and then we start feeling just overwhelmed and burdened, and we start just being a burden on other people. Other people don't care about adults that way. We're not children anymore. We are an adult. And it is time to step into the world and say, I am not going to repeat my old behaviors, because when we receive that rejection and relive that child wound, of rejection from the people that should love and care for us, we go back to our unhealthy coping mechanisms. Then we can't be dependable for other people that need us to be dependable. So that path is not a healthy path. Then we have the mundane path, where you may be having a little bit of contact with these people, and you're just choosing to just suffer in silence and not try to create anything more than the bare minimum. Let's say you just go to a 9 to 5, come home, stay to yourself, have some coping mechanisms, and just live a mundane life. That makes no difference. Or you could switch to the bright and glorious future. What that looks like is looking back at all the traumas, looking back at the rough path, and instead of looking at the injuring and the wounding over and over and over, look at the positives, because in the world there is good and there is evil, the yin and the yang. Neither one can exist without the other one. So what was meant for evil yields good. No joke. Because if you are a person that has lived many, many, many years with just trauma after trauma after trauma, you have grit, you have determination, and you probably have a survivor spirit, as in you get back up and you keep going. Well, you take those and you apply them with creativity. And granted, when you're being attacked and being treated poorly, it really drains you dry of your creativity. But if you can start controlling your mind and controlling how you want to conduct yourself moving forwards, that makes all the difference. When we have adversity now, as adults, after we've been through all that, we can use that as the perfect opportunity for character change. Because our brains have neural pathways that are developed. They also have these triggers or markers in the brain that trigger responses and processes when we get external stimuli going on. Now, it is hard work, but when you have a new trauma, you can actively choose how you use your brain in that situation. Do I panic? Do I repeat these old patterns that are ingrained in my brain? Or do I forcefully override to create a new response to new traumas? Therein lies character change. Therein lies the pathway to a brighter, more glorious, I use the word glorious, I think it's kind of cool, but to a better future. If we slide back into our old coping mechanisms, we will not be able to focus on the future, on our vision, and the direction we're heading. We will be so wrapped up in everything going on right around us, we'll start panicking, flailing, and we will lose sight of our objective, if we have an objective. And that puts us back in the box that other people perceive us as, or perceive us in. And that's as in, when they do something, we respond this way. The magic starts to happen when these people perceive you a certain way and they get no response on the way you would have responded in the past. I hope that makes sense a little bit. It will throw a monkey wrench in their brain. And usually what happens is those people just fall away. They no longer care to be a part of your life because they liked seeing you suffer. They liked seeing you panic. As I mentioned earlier, they go gossip and they feel better about themselves. But when they see you responding in victory, responding in love and kindness, and responding being sturdy and solid, they don't want any part of that, because that will actually reflect directly back to them on how they have treated you. And then they aren't able to go and gossip. It just kind of leaves them just like, Then they have to really analyze themselves, which most likely you will get a test period where people will treat you like trash even more, because they want you to respond in the old manner that you would. But when you stick to your new responses consistently, they will stop. They will give up. And they will go find somebody else to torment in their life, to feel better about themselves. But when we can free ourselves from our past and realize that we are not, our future is not dictated by our past unless we are not self-aware. That being said let's say your brain is like a record, the old school record with the needle going around, and one full rotation is an entire year. Well, you have all these responses programmed in, and in certain times of the year you act a certain way, and it's like a little skip, and it kind of jacks with your life or messes with your life. It's like bump, 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 you're hitting those. Well, when you work on character change and not responding in those old ways, the record starts playing smooth and you get rid of those bumps that were programmed in. And again, like I said earlier, it is not our fault when we are children and we have traumas. And further on in life, it's not our fault when we have traumas. Not everything. Sometimes we put ourselves in situations with the outcome as a trauma, but there are many in our life that are not our fault. But it becomes our responsibility to reprogram our brain to run smoothly when things get chaotic around us. It's not an easy process. And what I've developed is moving those markers in the brain so that external stimulus doesn't get those same results and it doesn't trigger those old responses that are not healthy whatsoever. It is a lot of work, but when you dig deep into why do I respond this way, it helps to write down what you don't like about those responses. And then it helps to write down, how do I want to respond? And when you actively choose to respond in a manner that is productive, that is solid, and that leads to a brighter, more glorious future, man, that's where reprogramming comes into play. You're starting to overwrite old neural pathways or make new ones that connect to better processes or to a better marker in the brain. Let's say, for instance, and I will just use me for instance. Whenever in the past I would have contact with my birth mother or I think he's my biological father. I doubt everything about my childhood. Whenever I'd have any contact with them, for about a week or two, my life and my brain was in chaos. Because the way they would treat me, the way they would remind me of how terrible and pathetic I was, and just their overall demeanor and disdain for me as a person. Well, it would throw me into chaos for about a week or two. Well, guess where I learned that? From my own parents. I saw how they would respond with interactions with their parents, and I learned that, and then I was repeating that. So now it's my responsibility to no longer respond in that manner. And the best thing for that would be just to cut them out. No longer have those people in my life that are going to cause chaos inside of me. So now I am working on the things I've written down of I no longer want to respond this way. I want to respond in love, in kindness, and then continue on the path that I'm on. Because many times when people see you doing well and making progress, they don't like that and they intentionally try to mess you up. Just because it's like crabs in the bucket. When crabs are trying to crawl out of the bucket, you have crabs come up and they will pull them back down. Well, there's crabs in your life that are going to try to pull you down in the bucket, and you've got to fight and fight to get out. And a huge part of that is character change. Just conducting yourself in a different manner. Now I'm going to wrap back to moving those markers or making new neural pathways. When you start actively making a new neural pathway or removing those bumps on the record when it goes around makes it skip, the really cool thing is your brain starts to realize that this old neural pathway of the way I used to respond is not applicable because this new method is used every single time. So your brain eventually just gets rid of those old pathways. Is it possible to redo those past responses? Yes, it is. But that's where our awareness comes in. Like in the moment, how am I acting? How am I conducting myself? And those are the hardest, most difficult times, and that is where the most vital work is done when you are getting triggered. But the really cool thing is, though, you can go ahead and develop resiliency before those issues even arise. And in a previous video, I talked about physical fitness is the best time for me to program in the healthy responses before the external responses even come into my life. And the way I would do that is, let's say I would get on the row machine and I would row for as long and as hard as possible as I could. And I would get to the point where my brain is screaming, telling my body to quit. Well, what I do is I ask myself, why am I wanting to quit? My lungs are working, my heart's working, my muscles are working. There's no reason to quit. My brain's telling me to quit. So then I would implement a character trigger, and I would focus on my breathing, and I would focus on the muscles being used, and I would focus on the next 10 seconds. Sometimes just the next 2 seconds. Like, I'm going to continue for the next 2 seconds. What this does is it takes your brain and you take your brain, you find where my quitting point is. And then you push past that in a healthy manner of breathing, of focusing, and going further than you thought you could. So let's take an extreme circumstance that presents in your life after you've been training to push your mind further than it thinks it can go. Well, you have this garbage coming into your life, and you realize, wait a second, I can hit my character trigger, I can focus on my breathing, focus on my actions, my heart's working, my brain's working, my lungs are working, my muscles are working, I can control my responses right now. I can go 10 seconds longer without responding in the old way. Matter of fact, I can go 10 minutes longer. I can go 10 days longer. Can I go 10 years longer? This is where the hard work of character change pays off, and it will change the course of your life. And it's basically changing your timeline. And I had a video about that, but it was a little bit rambling and went a little bit on further. But let's say the victim mentality is right here, and here's where your target is from, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me, bad responses, coping mechanisms. You come up to here, it's like, oh, poor me, but I'm going to kind of avoid the coping mechanisms, and you just kind of sail along. You bring your target up here, you get those stimulus in the outside where like, I am going to respond differently. I'm not poor me. I am doing great. I'm going to keep breathing, keep focusing, and focus on my conduct in the next 10 seconds, for the next 10 minutes, because I've learned that I can control myself. You change the trajectory of your life. I hope some of this sticks. I hope some of it resonates with you, which actually, that's actually a good phrase. And I hope some of it is helpful, because we have many broke people in our nation, but we have to step out of the past. We have to free ourselves in the moment now to control ourselves, to move forwards. And I want to encourage you to look at some of my older videos about character change. If you have any questions, ask. And I want to Also leave you with this. Your past does not dictate your future. Your spirit controlling your brain and how it responds in the next 2 seconds, in the next 10 seconds, in the next 10 minutes, that controls your future. Nobody from your past and none of your traumas do. It is all on you to reprogram your brain and create that character that will drive you into a future that is amazing. The end.